we can do something about this. So we need to act now. It's not time to wait. There is no time to wait until we start to see increasing hospitalizations. And in many countries, we're already starting to see that. So please, right now, act now, and especially as holidays are coming up and there's more social mixing and there's more, people need to evaluate and reevaluate what they do and make the decisions that are best for them and best for your families. Please do everything that you can to stay safe. And there are many ways that you can make situations safer, but please ask the question of, should I be doing this? And really just take a hard look and make sure that you keep you and your loved ones safe.
Thank you so much, Maria. We have quite a lot of follow-up questions already, and I would just like to remind for those who are maybe with us for the first time, if you're watching us on Twitter, use the hashtag AskWHO to ask your question. If you're watching us on other platforms, please use the comment section. There are a few follow-up questions. One is on, again, severity, Maria, and in particular among children. Do we have any information how Omicron impacts children?
We have some information, but it isn't a full picture yet. And so it's too early to make conclusions on that. I think, for parents that are out there and for people that are out there, we do know that this virus, whatever variant it is, can infect children. We've known that since the beginning. And for the most part, we have seen children experience asymptomatic infection, meaning they have no disease or mild disease, but they can get infected and then they can transmit. And we know that children with underlying conditions are at a higher risk of developing severe disease. So again, there's a lot that can be done to make sure that we keep our kids safe, where they live, where they study, where they go to school. There's a lot of mitigation measures that can take place. It is important that schools, stay open and that kids get the education that they need. But in terms of Omicron and children, it's far too early right now. I wouldn't want to overemphasize any, one particular, piece of information that we receive. But there are, within our clinical network, they are discussing, different age groups. We have seen some data that increased risk of severity increases with age, as is to be expected. But nothing, to conclude necessarily on kids.
Thank you so much, Maria. Mike, here is a question from Teresa Tyndall watching us on Facebook. You mentioned that Omicron is more transmissible. So Teresa is asking, how do we define more transmissible?
Well, there are a number of ways that can be done in the laboratory, or it can be done in the real world. You make some assumptions about transmissibility based on how successful the virus is at getting into human cells, or whether or not the virus can infect a human being with a lower exposure dose. There are many ways in which a virus can be measured as more transmissible. The difficulty is that what humans do affects the transmission of the virus. So there's the inherent transmissibility. Very often we talk about how transmissible is a virus in a universally susceptible population who are mixed in a certain way. So it's a very abstract term for how what the inherent transmissibility of the virus is versus the real world transmissibility, which is affected by factors like temperature. It's affected by factors like population density, behavior, the level of vaccination in the population. There's so many other factors that affect it. So right now, we use things like the reproductive number, the number of cases that each case generates. And certainly when we look at the growth rate, the number of real world cases, we often use growth rate as the real world measure. How fast are the number of cases growing? And right now, looking at growth rates and what people call doubling times, how long does it take for the number of cases to double, is, for an ordinary person on the street, even for myself, they're much better real world measures because it tells you what's happening. And when we look at, for example, right now in the United Kingdom, we're seeing a doubling time of 2 days or less, which means the number of cases are doubling every 2 days or less than every 2 days, which means if you have 100,000 cases today, it's 200,000 cases 2 days time, but then it's 400,000 2 days later, and then it's 800,000 2 days later. So in a week, let's imagine, in a week, 8 days, or just slightly more than a week of doubling time, the actual number of cases can increase 8 or 10-fold. And that's what we're concerned about. that even, as Maria said, in the context of the virus not being as severe in an individual, that number of cases can generate a lot of people who have severe disease, because there's just so many mild cases. The proportion of people who develop severe disease may be lower than with Delta, but the absolute number of people who get very sick goes up. So there are scenarios in which a much more transmissible and less severe virus can actually cause more hospitalizations and deaths. And I know that sounds counterintuitive to everybody, but that is the reality. So there's no question that the virus is transmitting very efficiently. It did so in South Africa in the context of very low levels of Delta variant transmission, very high levels of sero conversion in the population. So the Delta variant was struggling in the context in South Africa to actually generate more cases. The R was below zero. With Omicron, it came and has exploited that sort of environment, that vacuum, in a sense. Now that the variant is in Europe, it's competing much more head-on-head with Delta. We've seen in the UK that it's doing quite well. And the question remains, will it replace the Delta variant? And that's not certain yet. You could have co-circulation of these two variants for quite a long time, depending on the circumstances, depending on the situation, depending on underlying seroprevalence, in other words, how many people have had a previous infection, depending on how many people in the population have been vaccinated. So a number of factors could affect. I suspect we will have co-circulation for a period of time in many settings, and it's the same thing we do for each. We try to suppress transmission, vaccinate the most vulnerable, and ensure that our hospitals and healthcare systems are able to cope with those who require a lot of clinical support.
Can we remind people, around transmission, right? I mean, it's probably good to, no matter what variant it is, right? The transmission is affected by your setting, where you are. It's affected by the intensity of the exposure that you have with someone, and it's affected by the duration of how much time you spend with somebody. And in all of those factors, there's things that you can do to reduce the opportunity for this virus to spread. It spreads much more efficiently indoors compared to outdoors. It spreads much more efficiently indoors when you have poor ventilation and the opportunity for these droplets and these aerosols to pass between people. It spreads very efficiently if you don't have masks on, if you don't have distancing, if you're not vaccinated, if you're not improving your ventilation. And all of those things, when we talk about a layered approach, this is what we mean. So especially, again, during the holidays that are coming up, the more contacts that you have with others, especially in the context where you don't have measures in place, like masks, like getting tested, like getting vaccinated, like improving ventilation or opening the windows and doors so that you have good cross ventilations, the virus will take an opportunity to spread. And so there's different things that you can do for that. And I think also don't forget that we all collectively, globally, have a lot of experience with this virus. We're not in the same position we were a year ago or even 18 months ago. There's a lot that we know how to control this virus, how we can take control over what we do to reduce our exposure. And I think one of the things I think people may be scared, when they're hearing about Omicron and they're hearing about, oh my gosh, how much longer is this going to happen? There's a lot that we can do. And everything that you do every day, the decisions that you make, about gatherings or anything in your daily life matter. So please, wear the mask, even if you are vaccinated. First of all, get vaccinated when it's your turn. It's really critical that people who are at risk are vaccinated in all countries. But even if you are vaccinated, please also take measures to reduce transmission. So we need to drive vaccination up among people who need it most, and those are people who are at risk. But we also need all of us, regardless of if we are vaccinated or not, to take steps to reduce transmission. And all of that needs to happen now, not in January, when we get through the holiday, but now. And it doesn't mean stop everything. It just means be careful. It just means be cautious.
Thank you so much, Maria. There are a few follow-up questions to what you both said, and maybe I can take the first one from Banu watching us on LinkedIn. What properties of Omicron make it more infectious than Delta? Do droplets stay in the air longer? Do they stick to surfaces? Why is it more transmissible, as we keep saying?
there are lots of things that can happen in terms of to make a virus more successful at transmitting, and that's what higher transmission is. Sometimes viruses just can survive longer in the environment. Sometimes viruses can survive being dried out or being dealt with by normal sort of cleaning procedures. But in the main, in this case, it's usually because of a change in the spike protein. Attack. And really, sometimes that protein is very good at doing that. The shape of the protein, it's a lock and key, and it fits in really well, and the virus gets into the cell very easily, and then it can cause an infection much more successfully. Sometimes the virus is not that well adapted, and its spike protein is not really good at getting into human cells. That's why we've seen, for example, with animal populations, you have lots of SARS viruses out there, lots of coronaviruses. Most of them can't infect humans because they're not able to enter the human cell. Their spike proteins aren't adapted to human cells. Now what we have is 2 years of serial transmission in millions and millions of human beings. 2 years to really become much better adapted to entering human cells. And really what the Omicron variant has is a change in its genetic sequence that has changed the shape and changed the ability of that spike protein to attach to human cells and enter the human cell, and that's probably what's giving it its transmission advantage. But as I say, we don't know fully yet, because we don't know, to answer the question, does the virus survive longer in droplets or aerosols? Does the virus survive longer on surfaces? And a lot of that work is being done. Maybe Maria can update, but a lot of that work is being done. But the suspicion is clearly that the spike protein itself is just better able to enter the human cell and and infect those cells.
There are a lot of studies that are underway exactly that are looking at that. They're set up in experimental conditions, like in the lab, where they look at how long can a virus survive on different types of surfaces, like steel or cardboard or paper or plastic. And these experiments are set up in different temperatures with different UV light to look at virus survival and whether or not it can be viable on a surface, and if you touch that surface, and if you can touch your eyes, your nose, or your mouth and get infected that way. That is why one of the measures, in addition to masking and distancing, we do recommend disinfecting, particularly where there's patients, where we know patients are. But those studies are underway, and they'll compare Omicron versus Delta versus Alpha versus the ancestral strain, plus compared to MERS and other coronaviruses. But these collaborations are well underway, and this is why it's important that the virus is able to be shared, and so these experiments can be done, and that can be done in a coordinated manner. But I think from a public perspective, I think this is why we have to end this pandemic. What Mike was describing about the changes in the virus and the mutations in the virus, the more it spreads, the more opportunities it has to change. So that's why we really, really need to end this. I mean, aside from how disruptive this has been and how it has uprooted everybody's lives and how many people this virus has taken from us, we have to keep transmission low. It's not just, I've heard some narrative that we just kind of have to let it get to a point where it becomes endemic. And this pathogen is certainly on its way to becoming that, but that doesn't mean that this virus will not still be dangerous and still take the lives of our loved ones. So that's why we have to put in the work. 2022 can be the year where we end this pandemic. And I think, that needs to really just be our collective focus.
Thank you so much, Maria and Mike. And I just want to apologize. We had some connection issues, and I am not sure that our stream is anymore ongoing on Twitter. So we will post information that people can continue watching on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and we apologize for those technical difficulties. Mike, in previous question, you were also talking about coexistence between Omicron and Delta variant. And there is a viewer who is asking, is there a possibility for those two to mutate and merge together and create a new joint variant?
The evolution of coronaviruses, and particularly this virus, is very much a person becomes infected with one variant, and then the virus that emerges from that individual later is slightly different, because the virus reproduces so many times in the human body that there are errors, and these viruses have built-in errors. Some of those new viruses are not successful, and now and again one of those viruses is slightly more successful, and that's the evolutionary battle the viruses have. There is another way in which viruses can evolve, and that's called recombination. And there are with many infections, like influenza is a classic one, where if a single individual, and in the case of influenza it's very often swine or pigs, get infected with a bird strain and a human strain, those two viruses can recombine with each other when they're co-infecting the same person, and we can get a completely different virus out the other end. The vast majority of those viruses then are not well adapted. They're not successful in the next wave, in the next person they infect. And we see that with avian flu. You often hear WHO report on new avian flu strains in birds, and we hear about one human being infected. Very often that one human being does not transmit most of the time to another human being, because those viruses are not very adapted to human transmission. But every now and again, purely on the basis of chance, a recombination of viruses can produce something different and something either more transmissible or more virulent, and we're always watching out for that. So coronaviruses can do both. They do that slow evolution or antigenic drift. They kind of they evolve genetically in a very slow manner, and then just occasionally you can have these recombination events that create a big shift or an antigenic shift in the virus. Right now, most of the evolution of this virus has been along that first pathway, that evolution by just the huge levels of transmission and the huge numbers of people infected. That's allowing the virus to evolve very rapidly.
Thank you so much, Mike. The question, we're receiving a lot of questions on what causes mutations of the virus, and here is one, and I think it's important to explain, because we've also seen some conversations on social media that vaccinated people are causing mutations. So a question from Vincenzo is, are the vaccinated or unvaccinated causing the mutation? So I think it's very important that we clarify this.
So virus mutation is a natural process. When a virus replicates itself, it has this proofreading. It checks itself to see if it, and every time it replicates, it's not the exact same copy as it was previously. So this is a natural process. We call this virus evolution, and this is something that because it's a natural process. This is something that we've been tracking since the beginning. So replication and virus mutation is happening in anyone who gets infected. It's not a blame, and I think that question, the way that I've heard it sometimes, is that it's somebody else's fault, or somebody, it's those individuals and not those individuals. And I think that's why we're so keen to say that everybody has a role to play. Vaccinated people are not causing virus mutation. Unvaccinated people are not causing. This is something that's happening, and the more this virus circulates, the more opportunities it has to change. Vaccines are really quite incredible. I mean, I'm still impressed that we have so many safe and effective vaccines, and they are incredibly effective at preventing severe disease and death. So again, no matter how Omicron unfolds, get vaccinated, because Delta is still dominant and the vaccines will remain effective. We have to see how effective they are as we go into the future, but get vaccinated when it's your turn. But we also have to reduce that transmission, because if we allow this virus to continue to spread, it will continue to change. It is a natural process. It's not something someone is doing to make this virus change.
Thank you so much, Maria. And we said as well that we will reflect on upcoming holiday season. Many people around the world are having different either religious holidays or a New Year's celebration. So How, as we are in this epidemiological situation at the moment, how can we proceed with marking those important moments or gathering moments, but still protecting ourselves and our loved ones?
It's so important to mark these holidays and birthdays and gatherings and celebrations, and no matter what, I am sure that people will continue to find ways to celebrate. I think that's important. It's been a very difficult couple of years, and no matter, find ways to continue to be social. I think in terms of the gatherings themselves, right now there is no zero risk. There hasn't been zero risk since this virus emerged, but there are ways in which you can reduce the risk. You could limit the size of the gatherings. You can make sure that you are vaccinated. You can take a test. There are all these rapid tests that exist that are highly reliable now, and you can look at what is your exact status right now. You can make sure that you do things more outdoors if possible, depending on where you live, than indoors. And if you are indoors, you're wearing a mask, you're opening the windows. There's lots of different ways. But I think, for me, even within my own family, we just reassess and we have a discussion about what's right for us and what's right for our own family. And I hope that there are people around the world that are at least having that conversation. What do we need to do and what's right for us? What is the vaccination status of our family? Do we have to travel? How long is that travel? What mitigation measures are in place? Nothing is canceled. There may be things that are postponed, but I still believe that there's ways that people can celebrate. We just need to ask the questions of how can we do it as safely as possible.
Yeah, and again, maybe to say to people, because there are a lot of questions, even on some of the questions that are being asked here, Alex, around, is the vaccine effective? Why are people who are vaccinated getting sick? Does that mean the vaccine doesn't work? These are really important and rational, very rational questions. I think it's important to say to people that the vaccines were designed to prevent severe disease, prevent hospitalization, and avoid people dying. And certainly up to now, against the Delta variant, the vaccines have held up extremely well. What we've seen with the Omicron variant is that the level of antibodies, or the ability of the vaccines to effect neutralize the virus, has gone down a little, and that's measured in the level of antibodies in the blood. But remember, that's just the tip of the immunologic iceberg. We've spent literally, billions of years evolving life on this planet, and as mammals we've developed very sophisticated immune responses. Sometimes they go wrong and we get these autoimmune diseases, but it's a hugely sophisticated system, and it's not just dependent on just one thing like the level of antibodies. There are innate immune response, there are T cells, cell-mediated responses that provide a much broader level of protection. So when you're looking at the data that everyone is producing right now, yes, even with Delta, it was more likely that someone could become reinfected with these variants, and it's more likely that the vaccine will not protect you fully against becoming infected. But the vaccines up to now have provided excellent protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And we're still waiting for the final data on Omicron. Certainly, the vaccines do not appear to protect against just infection, but that is not what the vaccines were designed to protect against. They were designed to protect against severe illness, hospitalization, and death. And I think the preliminary data from South Africa and elsewhere, is showing that the vaccines, are providing protection against those severe outcomes. We will keep an eye on that, and we will continue to work. And one of the other questions on there was about, do we have to keep revaccinating? That's a really good question. Will we have to revaccinate every 6 months and with different variants? We don't know the answer to that question. But what we may need to do is think about second and third generation vaccines, different vaccines that might provide broader level of protection for a longer period of time. This is the story of the history of vaccine development. You develop a first vaccine that does what you need to do. Then you have to go to the second and third generation of vaccines to give longer and broader protection, and that work is already underway. So there are literally thousands of scientists, hundreds of thousands of scientists out there as we speak, looking at all of those issues, developing different candidates and different approaches to vaccination for the future. And I believe we will have new innovation. We will have new technologies. Some of the antiviral drugs that are coming online, and again, to both, say it's great to see that we're going to have antivirals come, but they're aimed at preventing severe disease in highly at-risk populations. And we're going to have to do some more work on those antivirals and how they're introduced and how we avoid antiviral resistance and how we select the right patients for those drugs. But you can see we're seeing that happening. So the idea that we're going to have to develop new generations of vaccines, that we're seeing new molecules, new treatments come online, it is hopeful, and we will beat this virus. I think it's important. We're going to beat this virus. This virus will take its place. Maybe it will stay around for a long time. Maybe it will cause small outbreaks for a very long time. Maybe we will have to have vaccines that provide long-term protection. But, we will come through this. You keep saying it, I'm saying it today, but we will get through this. And right now, the best thing that every single person can do is reduce your chance of being infected. Reduce your own chance of infecting somebody else. However you can do that within the means that you have. Know how you can do that. Get vaccinated. If you are a vulnerable person in an older age group, the single best thing you can do today, right now, is get vaccinated. I feel so sad for those people living in low-income countries who haven't had that opportunity. And I would say to people living in countries where you have access to vaccine, please go get that vaccine. There has also been the issue of booster shots and whether certain groups should have a third primary dose. Again, as I said last week, we in WHO are not against boosters. What we're for is equity. The DG said it last night. We're against inequity, not against boosters. What we have to match is the government's need in any individual country to provide maximum protection to its own population with the need for us collectively as a global tribe to provide protection to those who most need it. So we believe vaccines should be used to give a primary course of protection to the people everywhere who most need it, and then within governments, within individual countries. So if people are offered a booster shot, I said, please take it. You should have no guilt in taking a booster shot. If you were a vulnerable person and you're offered that shot, take it. But then, as I say, then you can write a note to your representative or your politicians and say, now, please share some more vaccines with the people in other countries who really need them.
Thank you so much, Mike, and I'm glad we are coming towards the end of this session as we are running out of time, but you actually brought the note of hope and also what each of us can do to protect ourselves and others. So maybe we can end in what is your hope for 2022, and can we end this pandemic next year?
I think we can. I know we can. 2022 is the year we can end the COVID-19 pandemic. We have tools now that can take the severe spectrum of disease out. We can reduce morbidity, hospitalizations, severe disease, those needing ICU, those who are dying. We can take the death out of COVID-19, and we can also reduce the spread. I mean, the emergence of these variants of concern of Omicron is the latest. There will be more if this virus continues to circulate, and we have tools right now. I'm incredibly hopeful for 2022. I am exhausted at the end of 2021, I'm not gonna lie. And I think everybody else is as well, because we think how much more will there be, but it will end. This pandemic will end, and we just, if you just think every day what you can do to keep you and your loved ones safe. It's not just about you, it's about everyone else that is out there. And these variants are showing us, whether we like it or not, we are in this together, because we have to keep everyone safe globally, not just some. And it is not only the morally right thing to do, it's the epidemiologic right thing to do. It's the economically right thing to do. So I'm incredibly hopeful for 2022 in the fact that we can regain control over this. We can significantly reduce transmission. We can significantly reduce deaths, and we can get back to our lives. And we just have to be cautious. hang in there with us. I don't know if this is our last live before the holiday New Year's season, but we of course wish everyone, the safest holidays that they can have. But please just be careful. Please be smart. You are smarter than this virus, even though the virus doesn't have a brain, but you are smarter than this virus, and show it. And prove us wrong. Make it be so that Mike and I don't have to do any more lives with you about this, and maybe we'll come chat with you about something else. But let's end this. Let's do it.
Mike, what is your hope for next year?
She said.
All she said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to hope for the best. You do have to though prepare for not the worst, but prepare for a tough few months, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, going into next year. In some senses, the die is already cast. I mean, our social mixing and the levels to which we had released many of the public health and social measures, the under-vaccination of groups, even within countries. We talk about equity between countries, but there's huge inequity within countries. You go to some developed industrialized nations, there are ethnic minority differences in levels of vaccination. There are social class levels in immunization. So I think, as we go into next year, countries need to close the gaps in equity within countries. We need to close the gaps in equity between countries. And we need to build out of this with a safer and fairer world. Now, I know that sounds like mum and apple pie, but the reality is a fairer world will be a safer world. And that's the reality. It's the unfairness with which we've dealt with this pandemic within countries and between countries that has driven an awful lot of the negative impacts of this. Much of the negative impact of this pandemic was built in years ago, with people not having access to health services, people having unmanaged hypertension, unmanaged diabetes, not having access to prevention services because of their ethnicity, because of their class, because they were unemployed, because they were homeless, because they're a migrant. We have built an unfair world within countries and between countries, and unfairness has driven so many of the negative impacts of this pandemic, and I think we need to learn that lesson. We're treating our planet very poorly. We're treating, a person is judged in society is judged on how they treat the person who has least, how they treat the most vulnerable person, how they treat the most marginalized person, not how they treat the most popular person. And we've entered a populist culture where we adore fame and we adore celebrity and we adore all of that. And fair enough. But that's not how we judge or should be judged. We'll be judged by how we I think Mandiba said that the society should be judged on how it bases those it detains. So in some senses, society is judged by how you treat people who are most marginalized. Sorry, I was a bit distracted with all the noise there. So I do have great hope for next year, but my hope isn't just that we end the pandemic. I hope we do. But my hope is that we don't forget why we're where we are. And it's not been because of a virus. Yes, the virus was the vehicle. It was the stimulus for all of this tragedy. But much of this tragedy could be avoided if we had stronger health systems, if we had fair social systems, if people had equal access to care, if people had equal access to life and livelihoods. And we don't have that. We don't have that. This is not a fair world. So I hope when we come out of the pandemic that we carry that lesson and we decide to build a fairer world.
This is a great idea for those who don't have any resolutions yet for next year. You gave a great idea of bringing fairness into this world, not just into the pandemic response, but in all other threats that we are facing. And I want to thank to you and to all our viewers. The list of countries you are watching us from is very, very long. UK, Germany, Nigeria, Thailand, Philippines, Mexico, South Africa, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Libya, Zambia, Mauritius, India, France, and many, many others. I also want to thank to everyone who's been with us this whole year and following our Ask WHO sessions. We will continue with this series. Probably next time will be next year. But we will continue updating you regularly with everything that we find out more about Omicron and other health issues. As Maria mentioned, there is something that we all can do to still celebrate holidays but stay safe. So I hope you'll follow her advice, and wishing you all the best for next year. Goodbye.